The problem lay buried, unspoken, for many years in the minds of American women. It was a strange stirring, a sense of dissatisfaction, a yearning that women suffered in the middle of the 20th century in the United States. As she made the beds, shopped for groceries, matched the slipcover material, ate peanut butter sandwiches with her children, chauffeured Cub Scouts and brownies, lay beside her husband at night, she was afraid even to ask herself the silent question, is this all? When Shirley Jackson was giving birth to her third child, she was asked by a hospital clerk for her occupation. "Writer," said Jackson. The clerk looked at her, bemused, and replied, "I'll just put down housewife." This should come as no surprise, for in mid-century America, a woman's place was still thought to be the home. But for Jackson, and many women of her era, home held the potential to house many horrors. And it was this tension, according to biographer Ruth Franklin, that animated all of Jackson's writing. It can be no accident, she writes, that in many of these works, a house, the woman's domain, functions as a kind of protagonist. Her horror stories, which always take place primarily on a psychological level, are grounded in the domestic. In We've Always Lived in the Castle, an entire family is poisoned at the dinner table. And in her most famous novel, The Haunting of Hill House, the children's nursery is a site of sheer maternal terror.
She finds terror in the mundane, and I think that's part of why her flavor of a haunted house is very different than, just a straight up slasher film.
In Shirley, Josephine Decker's semi-fictionalized biopic exploring the genius of the acclaimed writer, we see Jackson come undone in her own house of domestic horrors, when Jackson's husband invites a young woman, Rose, into their home to take care of the housekeeping, under the guise of helping Shirley write. Actually, though, this is for his own benefit. It is he who cannot survive without a housekeeper, a role Shirley has no desire to play.
That becomes the space in which Rose, basically just sort of takes over. And when she meets that space, it's gross, it's this like messy, uncared for, unkempt area. And she fulfills the role of the soon-to-be mother and housewife.
I need you to run an errand for me. Oh, so the writing's going well then. Please don't ever ask me that again.
As this ingenue brings traditional domesticity into the house, she brings too to the fore fragments of Shirley, alienated by her own home and the creeping, crawling, bone-chilling expectations of 1950s patriarchy. This is not to say that Rose is an evildoer. On the contrary, in this story, Rose and Shirley are terrorized by the very same monster. Rose perhaps hasn't realized it yet.
It almost feels like she is entering a little bit of Shirley's mind, and is trying to kind of excavate and kind of see and explore and kind of learn more about Shirley through her home, through her desk, through her papers, all of that. And I think that is something that helps to kind of create the overall idea of this Alice falling down the rabbit hole, or that idea of she's tumbled into this world that is completely different than the normal 50s household.
Shirley Jackson was known to suffer from agoraphobia and crippling anxiety, and so her house takes on dual meaning.
A clean house is evidence of mental inferiority.
It's both her sanctuary and her prison. As Rose explores the house, she is in essence coming to understand Shirley, the house being an extension of her mind, her intellect, her pathology. It both reflects it and inspires it.
She's in relationship to it. The house also possesses a trickery. It hides things. It becomes petulant. Given her agoraphobia, the house becomes a breathing, sentient being that she's in a constant conversation with.
It did feel not overtly feminine, not overtly masculine. It felt real. It felt human.
It feels like a house that is organically developed over time. It's almost like a bit of nature itself. Everything grows out of everything else.
The house will hold her creativity. The house will give her confidence to face that, as that also will tear her down, you know. But it's in the house that she has the first vision of her heroine. It's in the bathtub that she has the first idea about what might have happened to this girl and why she did what she did.
I guess we wanted to make it feel very dreamlike, because the only person you really ever see in there is Shirley, and it's almost like you're inside her brain when she's in that tub, you know, thinking about and imagining aspects of the story and conjoining those with aspects of her life.
Shirley, you all right?
As Shirley challenges Rose and her preconceptions, so too does Rose begin to challenge Shirley's idea of her own femininity.
I kind of think of Rose's arrival as kind of a germination for Shirley.
She begins to open Shirley up creatively, and she starts to realize she may have more in common with her lonely heroines than she once thought.
That is something that is all over Shirley's work. These lost girls, these kind of disjointed girls. There's an entirely different side to what the feminine may mean, and a side that is a lot darker, a lot more complicated.
Do not tell me I do not know this girl! Don't you dare!
This encounter with the great horror writer stirs within Rose some of the same turmoil that Shirley wears so brazenly on her sleeve, in the end coming to realize the complexity of it.
That's the part that she initially fears in Shirley. And when she refers to her as like, she's mean and mad and crazy and horrible and, you know, disgusting. And in essence, I think that's part of what all of Shirley's heroines feel about the messiness of their own femininity, the messiness of having conflicting desires, you know, wanting to really have sex with your husband and wanting to be petulant and taken care of and taken seriously and make these amazing meals, but also live in the complicated idea that what happens in your mind is not having any place to go. I love the idea that the domestic landscape is almost a utopian idea for a different kind of femininity, one where you can really create it. You know it better than anybody. You have an authority that you don't have when you leave that space. You know, your role there is supreme.
As Rose begins to finally see, and Shirley completes her novel, the two women part ways with a renewed understanding of themselves and their femininity. Just like the house can hold a space for comfort and for torment, just as it can be a loving family home and a tomb for inner secrets, so too can a woman's place in the world. The home is nothing without the woman, but the woman is so much more than her home.